Thank you, Madam. I'll have my opening statement circulated.
Thank you.
ID 2.
I was just about to say, I will mark this as ID too. Thank you, Mr. Bird. Just maybe give it another minute or so.
Okay.
I think everyone's sat down. Okay. Are you ready, Mr. Bird? Thank you.
I am. Thank you, Madam. Just by way of introduction, if I may, the Council maintains that the overarching main issue in this case and remains whether the appellant can demonstrate the very special circumstances necessary to justify their proposed inappropriate development in the Greenbelt, i.e. whether the harm by reason of inappropriateness and any other harm, Greenbelt and non-Greenbelt harms, would be clearly outweighed by the benefits it advances. The other main issues encompass other freestanding reasons why planning permission should not be granted and or feed into the overall Greenbelt balance, which you and in due course the Secretary of State must undertake. The Council does not accept that the appeal site falls within the MPPF's definition of grey belt, and in consequence, notwithstanding the revised Greenbelt policy position, for the appeal proposal to be permitted, it must satisfy the very special circumstance test. And it's essential that that test is applied correctly and that the requisite weight is given to the Greenbelt harms in the overall balance. The MPPF expressly advises that substantial weight must be given to the Greenbelt harm, reflecting the importance of the protection of the Greenbelt in national policy, so important that the presumption against inappropriate development displaces the paragraph 11 tilted balance, which, as explained below, does not avail the appellant in this case in any event. Whilst the very special circumstances test requires a qualitative rather than a quantitative assessment, and it's not necessary for each consideration relied upon in support of Greenbelt development to be very special of itself, the Court of Appeal has stated that the threshold set by the test is higher still than the exceptional circumstances test for Greenbelt release through the development plan process. That's not surprising, as the Greenbelt is a designation of national importance and the strength of its protection must reflect that. And that is a deliberate policy. The fundamental aim of Greenbelt is to prevent urban sprawl by keeping land permanently open. Imposing a very high bar before inappropriate development is permitted in the Greenbelt through the development management process is key to ensuring permanence. Whilst the recent changes to national policy have expanded the categories of appropriate development in the interest of delivering necessary growth, there has been no lessening of the policy of protection against inappropriate development. The Council supports the Government's growth agenda and has recognised and sought to make provision for both the expansion and modernisation of creative industries which are clustered in its area. It is not a blocker of growth when it's proposed in the right location. It has granted planning permission for the very significant expansion onto Greenbelt land of the UK's premier film studio, Pinewood Studios, and on land released from the Greenbelt and allocated through the Wickham District Local Plan, it sought to encourage the development of the Wickham Film Studios. The Council thus recognises the need to ensure that the UK's world-leading economic sectors, including the creative industries, can adapt and grow. That is in the interests of both the national and the local economy. However, in the case of the proposed development, the appellant has failed to demonstrate that the substantial Greenbelt and other harms which its proposal would result in are clearly outweighed by the benefits when each of the harms and benefits is properly weighted and the development is not in accordance with the Wickham District Local Plan. The new claim made in the appellant's evidence that the local plan should be regarded as out of date for the purposes of the MPPF will be tested in evidence, but even were it correct, does not avail them because, in the absence of having demonstrated the existence of very special circumstances, the MPPF itself provides a strong reason for refusing planning permission. Just by way of update in relation to the Council's reason for refusal with regard to reason refusal 8 and main issue I, as set out in Mr. Fannon's rebuttal proof of evidence on ecology and biodiversity, the Council has now satisfied an acceptable alternative SANG provision on the Council's own land at Spade Oak to address the mitigation required by the Hollands Farm housing allocation with the use of public right-of-way through the appeal side as part of the circular walk. There is therefore now a reasonable prospect of SANG mitigation being delivered were the appeal proposal to progress, and reason for refusal can be regarded as resolved. With regard to reason for refusal 9 and main issue J, the parties have been working collaboratively to agree the 106 agreement and are close to reaching a concluded agreement, as you will hear. Save in respect of highways mitigation, it's likely that the reason for refusal will be also regarded as resolved during the course of the inquiry. The remainder of these submissions structured in line with the remaining main issues identified by you following the case management conference of the 18th of November 2024, although clearly under the main issue A, we've also built in the issue of the appropriateness or otherwise of the development. The development is inappropriate development in Greenbelt policy terms, it's therefore by definition harmful to the Greenbelt. The appeal proposal would also result in a significant loss of spatial and visual openness in this part of the Greenbelt, and would conflict with 4 of the 5 purposes of Greenbelt. There is a measure of agreement on this reason refusal between the parties. The appellant does not seek to rely on any of the exceptions to inappropriate development in paragraph 154 of the National Planning Policy Framework. It accepts some harm to one of the Greenbelt purposes, as well as significant harm to visual and spatial openness will be caused by the proposed development, albeit of a slightly lesser magnitude than in the Council's view. However, the appellant seeks to sidestep this acknowledged harm by claiming that the appeal site is Greybelt and the development is not inappropriate, having regard to paragraph 155 of the framework. That is wrong. Applying the tests in paragraph 155, the appeal site is on land that strongly contributes to Greenbelt purposes A and B. There is no demonstrable unmet need for the type of development proposed. See main issue C below, and the development would not be in a sustainable location with particular reference to paragraphs 110 and 115 of the framework. The appeal site itself is largely rural and open. It is free from buildings, with the exception of a number of small timber shelters associated with the dog training field in part of plot 3, and its boundary to the east, Westthorpe Farm Lane, is relatively weak, and to the south there's no clearly defined boundary at all. This may be compared with the present strong boundary to Marlow provided by the A404. The Buckinghamshire Greenbelt Assessment, Part 1, commissioned by the Council, concluded that the general area in which the appeal site is located performs strongly against the purposes of the Greenbelt, and the Buckinghamshire Greenbelt Assessment, Part 2, Individual Site Assessment 2017, which assessed that part of the appeal site comprising plots 1, 2 and 3, concluded on its methodology that the site performed moderately against the 5 purposes of the Greenbelt and should remain in the Greenbelt, not least because development of the assessed area would be a clear example of unplanned sprawl. We await the government's promised guidance on the identification of Greybelt land, but the Council does not consider that a site which contributes as strongly to the meeting of Greenbelt purposes as the appeal site can reasonably be said to meet the NPPF glossary definition. It contributes strongly to Greenbelt purpose A, checking unrestricted sprawl, as it, together with the A404, provides the barrier to the east which restricts the sprawl of Marlow. That would be lost if the appeal site were developed. The proposed development would conflict with and significantly harm this purpose, as it would result in urban sprawl beyond Marlow's well-defined boundary and would not appear contiguous with the built-up area of the settlement due to the separation afforded by the A404. The sprawl would be perceived from many vantage points, as is evidenced in various LVIAs provided by the appellant. The appeal site also contributes strongly to Greenbelt purpose B to prevent neighbouring towns merging into one another. As found in the Arup assessment, the appeal site is part of an essential gap between Marlow and Bourne End, and along with other areas within that gap, it is cumulatively important in maintaining the separation between Marlow and Bourne End and between Marlow and Little Marlow. The proposed development conflicts with and significantly harms this purpose, as from a number of vantage points it will visibly diminish the open countryside character of the essential gap, particularly between Marlow and Little Marlow. The extent of the reduction is significant, 22% of the gap to Bourne End and 49% of the gap to Little Marlow. In views from Winter Hill, the proposed development would also erode the perceived separation in views of Marlow and High Wycombe. Whilst not relevant to the issue of Greybelt, the proposed development would also significantly harm Greenbelt purpose C to assist in safeguarding the countryside from encroachment. Even taking into account all the proposed mitigation measures in the form of building design and screen planting, the proposed development would result in a significant scale of urbanising development that would encroach onto open countryside, notwithstanding the semi-urban influences to which it is subject. The existing character of the appeal site, which is largely rural and open and separated from the well-defined edge of Marlow, will be significantly undermined. This encroachment would be particularly apparent in views of the site from Winter Hill and Bloom Hill, as well as from the Volvo footbridge, the right-of-way through the appeal site, and from the A404 and Marlow Road. The proposed development would also considerably harm Greenbelt Purpose E. Whilst it's accepted that available non-Greenbelt size of a site to accommodate the appeal proposals as advanced would be limited within Buckinghamshire, the appellant's alternative sites assessment appears to have been tailored to support the case for the proposals and is dependent on acceptance of the appellant's need and critical mass arguments, which the council maintains are unproven. The lack of alternative non-Greenbelt and now grey belt sites has therefore not been clearly demonstrated. As to the effect on openness, the proposed development would cause very significant harm both spatially and visually. Plots 1, 2 and 3, comprising over 22 hectares, would be entirely developed with a dense grid of large-scale industrial buildings. There will also be development on plots 4 and 5, including regular and repeated use of the backlot on plot 5, the erection of temporary structures, including some over 15 metres in height. The permanence of the greenbelt would be lost. The impact of the development on visual openness and the perception of high-density industrial scale development extending out into the countryside would be clear from a number of vantage points, both adjacent to the appeal site and further away. In the proximity of the site, these include the Volvo footbridge along Marlow Road at the northern boundary of the site and the public right-of-way which runs through the appeal site. Further away, there would be views of the site from Winter Hill to the south of the site, where the development will be seen in the setting of the Chilterns National Landscape, and indeed from Bloom Wood, north of the site within the national landscape itself, where the development will be in front of the Scarp Slope to the south of the River Thames corridor. The appeal site is not grey belt. Harm would be caused to the green belt by definition, with significant harm to the green belt purposes and to openness of the green belt, and planning permission should not therefore be granted for the development unless the appellant succeeds in demonstrating the existence of very special circumstances. I then turn to the effect of the development on the policy RUR4 area. The proposed development conflicts with local plan policy RUR4, which allocates the 329 hectare Little Marlow Lakes Country Park for outdoor recreation. The RUR4 area currently accommodates a variety of leisure uses, including walking and enjoying nature along public and permissive paths, as well as publicly accessible private activities, including fishing, water sports, open water swimming, camping and other outdoor activities. The application site falls wholly within the RUR4 policy area. As set out in the Little Marlow Gravel Pits SPG, delivery of the country park requires working with developers to bring it forward in the context of the existing policy framework and guidance. And Wickham District Council resolved to designate the land covered by policy RUR4 formally as a country park in 2017. And whilst this designation was not completed, the council agreed to retain a commitment to the whole country park area, with the initial phase of delivery covering land in the council's ownership. This approach does not rule out the future expansion of the designation to cover the whole area, and as the local plan identifies, the park is already in use for a variety of formal and informal recreation and sporting uses, and is crossed by a number of public footpaths, providing an extensive network of circular routes. It is already meeting the principal statutory purpose of a country park. RUR4 is clear in its terms as the kind of development that will be permitted within the allocated area, and it is not predicated on formal designation. And there is no basis for saying that the policy is out of date because the allocated area has not been formally designated. The proposed use of the site as a film studio is not an outdoor recreation use, and the proposal is therefore clearly contrary to policy RUR4. Even with mitigation, the industrial nature and large scale of the development is such that it will significantly prejudice the function of the allocated country park as a whole. It would occupy nearly 10% of the allocated area in close proximity to Marlow, directly adjacent to the Chilterns National Landscape and within its setting. It would disconnect the country park from Marlow. Pedestrians accessing the country park from Marlow would first have to traverse the film studio site, eliminating the existing open countryside character and adding to the separation between the settlement and the recreation area. The Council acknowledges that the appeal proposal would enable the delivery of some of the aims of policy RUR4, including connectivity, and those are benefits which are given appropriate weight in the planning balance. However, even taking into account such improvements, the development would conflict with the overall purpose of the policy, and it therefore undermines the spatial strategy of the local plan, giving rise to conflict with the local plan policies CP1 and 2 and policy RUR4, together with the Little Marlow Gravel Pits SPG. I turn to touch on the need for the proposal. The Council is not satisfied that a demonstrable need exists for the proposed development. It was formulated at a time when the streaming wars were at their peak and production expenditure in the UK reached £6.9 billion 2022, supported by the wide range of stage space available across the UK. The available figures for HETV high-end television spend in 2024 show a production spend of 4.7 billion with an expectation of full-year production spend of 6.27 billion. That should be film and high-end TV, not just high-end TV. On the appellant's own case, the existing capacity of the UK's stage space is capable of supporting a production spend of 8.9 billion. That's without any of the pipeline supply being built. Due to a combination of concerns about demand, competing supply overhang and construction inflation, very few new pipeline developments have commenced since 2022. That reflects the Council's experience with the progress on the Pinewood expansion on hold and the Wickham Studios proposals being abandoned. Rather than the supply of soundstage space, the more pressing issue appears to be skills shortage. Whilst the appellant has presented various forecasts of demand for stage space over time, it is inherently difficult to forecast future studio demand, and particularly difficult at this point of time, given the major US production corporates' changed focus from growth to profitability, and certainty as to whether the actors and writers' strike in the US were the principal cause for the reduction in production spend, and whether they are masking an underlying reduction. It is reasonable to forecast some need for stage space, with the UK capturing a greater market share of the global production spend, but even on the appellant's own forecast, the existing and pipeline supply of stage space is capable of meeting their forecast demand until 2029. That is a forecast demand for the West London cluster, which excludes existing and pipeline its supply in parts of London and the South East, which do not fall within the appellant's claimed boundaries. The West London cluster itself has no formal status. The British Film Institute identifies the focus as being a wider Metro London cluster, and its boundaries have expanded as new facilities are provided. It reflects where demand has been met in the South East over time, as opposed to being a reliable indicator of where demand needs to be met. That is not to deny that there is a cluster, that the weighting of the cluster is to the west of London, or that the appeal site falls within any reasonable definition of the cluster. However, it's not alone in that context, and there is a more advanced pipeline of supply of greater quantum than the appellant chooses to acknowledge, which appears to be capable of meeting the forecastable need in both quantitative and qualitative terms. This is without any further potential sites for stage-based development, which might be identified by a more rigorous alternative sites assessment. The need case will be more fully explored in evidence, but the Council is not satisfied that a demonstrable need exists for the appeal proposal. Turning to the effect of the proposal on the character and appearance of the area, including the setting of the Thames Valley and Chilterns National Landscape. Whilst the appeal site was once quarried and landfilled, most of the site has been restored, although subsequent neglect of the site has generated rough grassland and scrub across much of it. It nonetheless has landscape value, derived from being open, unbuilt, green, and integral to a distinctive landscape of water bodies, fields, and wooded margins, which provide a setting for a host of local recreational activities. It is not despoiled and has a moderate to high landscape value in its own right, and having regard to that value and its relationship to adjacent landscapes to which it contributes, both the adjoining Chilterns National Landscape and Winter Hill to the south, it is a valued landscape for the purposes of paragraph 187A of the MPPF. The proposed development would extend urban development across the valley floor, appearing as an expansion of Marlow with the scale and grain of an industrial estate and increasing the sense of urbanisation in the Thames Valley floor itself. It would therefore erode the physical and visual connectivity between the national landscape and the adjacent Thames Valley, resulting in significant moderate adverse effects on the landscape character of the national landscape and the landscape character of Winter Hill. The appellant's claims that there would be no significant landscape effects beyond the site and its immediate context will be explored in evidence. However, they do not properly reflect the role which the appeal site plays in the wider sensitive landscape. As to visual effects, the proposed development will have major adverse significant visual effects both in the immediate vicinity of the appeal site and in a number of sensitive longer range views. In the immediate vicinity, the incongruous, dense industrial development will be visible from the public right-of-way which traverses the appeal site east-west, the access road to Westhorpe House and Westhorpe Park, and the A404, A4155 Westhorpe interchange at the northern edge of the site. It would also be highly visible from public vantage points in the national landscape and from Winter Hill and the Chiltern Way Regional Trail. While the built edge of Marlow is present in many views, along with glimpses of Little Marlow, and there are busy roads at its edges and passing through it, this is a predominantly rural landscape. In views from the national landscape, walkers will be the principal receptors, and they will be highly sensitive to the proposed development. In many of the views from the national landscape, the development will be seen to introduce a tall, bulky and dense development with a distinctly industrial appearance. It would separate the viewer from the countryside beyond, including both the Thames Valley and the dramatic scarp of Winter Hill. In some views, it will break the skyline, and the continuity between the landscapes will be lost or significantly compromised in a number of important views. In relation to Winter Hill, the long-ranging views northwards across the Thames floodplain and into the national landscape are an essential part of its landscape character and visual amenity. From the public rights-of-way and open access land, there are intermittent views of the valley floor and the appeal site with the Chiltern national landscape as a backdrop. Where these views open up, they're often dramatic and clearly valued, including a designated viewpoint. The proposed development would introduce an extensive area of dense buildings with an industrial character across a number of the views, presenting a more intrusive urbanised edge to Marlow and introducing a degree of separation from the Thames floodplain landscape in the foreground and the national landscape beyond, and a number of the effects will be major, adverse and significant. The mitigation measures proposed cannot materially lessen the effects, which are a product of the scale, height and dense layout of the proposed development and where it sits in the landscape. This is a scheme which has been driven by the concept of critical mass, with the resulting form and scale which simply cannot be satisfactorily mitigated by the quality of the design of the buildings themselves. It will impose itself on the landscape rather than integrate into it, and by reason of the harm to the character and quality of the area and the national landscape, the proposed development conflicts with local plan policies CP 9 and 10, RUR 4 and DM 30, 32 and 35 and policy DM 11. It's also contrary to the guidance in the NPPF at 135, 187 and 189. I then deal with the main issues E, F and G, which are the effect on the surrounding highway network, sustainable modes of travel and the safety of highway users together, starting with the effect on the highway network, surrounding road network. The appellant has failed to show that the proposed development can be accommodated in the surrounding road network without severe impacts. Whilst there's no dispute over the trip generation associated with the proposed development, there remains a dispute as to whether the assessment of the impacts of the development should be undertaken by reference to the unmanaged or managed trip rates. The Council's view is that the appellant's use of managed trip rates, which assume a 60% modal share for cars, is not a reasonable future scenario, particularly given the context of the appeal site. The Council is firmly committed to the vision-led approach advocated by the NPPF, but the outcomes inherent in such approach need to be achievable. As to the highways modelling, the Council raised a number of concerns with the appellant's highways modelling in the officer's report and in its statement of case, but without any prior notice to the Council, the appellant embarked upon further modelling in an attempt to show that its development can be accommodated on the road net without severe impacts. Essentially, the model was extended to include the Bobmore Lane pedestrian crossing with its proposed signalisation. However, the revised model does not assess the implications of changing the crossing on conditions in the centre of Marlow, which the appellant acknowledges are a constraint. The implications of the increased traffic throughout westbound on the centre of Marlow are not known and not understood due to the model limitation. Whilst the Council accepts the need for a balanced approach to the consideration of impacts, that requires, as an essential first step, a full and proper understanding of both the impacts as well as the benefits. The information provided by the appellant to date in respect of its new VISIM modelling is missing key information in this respect, and the appellant has therefore failed to show that its development can be accommodated without severe residual cumulative impacts on the road network in breach of paragraph 116. Madam, we too would support the updated statement of common ground on highways, and Mr. Tester will seek to work with Mr. Dix to provide that for week 3 of the inquiry.
That would be very helpful if they can both work together, please.
Thank you. The failure to sufficiently promote active and sustainable modes of travel. Proposed mode share targets are unrealistic. Whilst no issue is taken with the proposed bus service provision, given the nature of the use, for many visiting the proposed development, public transport will not be a realistic option. Further, having regard to the general characteristics of the area within which the appeal site is located, most notably the barrier presented by the A404, walking and cycling facilities to and from and through the appeal site are not direct or along desired lines, are substandard in part, as well as being unattractive and lacking the perception of being safe. The pedestrian and cycle accessibility of the appeal site via the Westhorpe interchange is fragmented and unsafe, further contributing to the unattractiveness of travelling to the site by active modes. The ambitious modal shift required to deliver the managed vehicle trip generation will demand a quality of solutions to the existing walking and cycling infrastructure the appellant is unable to commit to due to the highway constraints, particularly at the Westhorpe interchange itself. What has been shown to be achievable will not be sufficiently attractive to facilitate the necessary transition away from car travel. If granted and delivered, the proposal to develop or redevelop the Volvo footbridge will result in an improvement to the existing facility. However, the shortcomings of the proposed new bridge, notably the crossing distance involved, and the fact that the setting of the bridge would remain screened by vegetation and subject to limited overlooking, mean that this crossing remains a barrier to the attractiveness of walking and cycling as a mode of travel to the appeal site. Overall, the proposed development would not achieve safe, secure and suitable high-quality access by all modes of travel for all people. The design of footway elements and the nature of the proposed use is such that for many users, active and sustainable modes of travel will not be an attractive or practical proposition. Turn then to the effect on the safety of highway users. The proposed redesign of the eastern arm westbound approach of the Westhorpe interchange is not compliant with the relevant DMRB design standards in relation to deflection and junction geometry. Whilst there's an existing departure from standards, there will be additional traffic on this arm of the roundabout directly attributable to the proposed development, which will potentially approach and travel through the roundabout at increased speeds as a result of the insufficient deflection which the redesign provides. It therefore results in an unnecessary increase in the risk of conflict between users of the roundabout, which in turn results in an unacceptable impact on highway safety. Other proposed new pedestrian and cycle infrastructure and improvements to existing infrastructure also fails to meet the required standards and is detrimental to safety and convenience of vulnerable highway users, thereby resulting in further unacceptable effects on highway safety. As to the proposed internal site layout, it's not safe and suitable for its intended use and will lead to increased chances of conflict between drivers, cyclists and pedestrians accessing and moving around the site, which could and should have been designed out. The design leads to instances where vehicles will be required to reverse over extended distances, in some instances around a bend, all where movements by vulnerable road users are to be encouraged, having regard in particular to the ambitious mode shift targets. That's unnecessarily detrimental to the safety and convenience of users of the site and the appellant's proposed site management and does not adequately mitigate for the poor highways design. Overall, the proposed development is not suitably accessible to non-car modes of transport, is detrimental to highway safety and convenience, and is therefore contrary to adopted highways policies and national and local design criteria applicable to the development, notably paragraphs 110, 115 and 116 and 7 of the NPPF and local plan policy DM33 of the local plan. Moving then on to the effect of the proposal on the living conditions of existing residents. The proposed development would have a significant negative effect on the amenity of the residents of the 31 apartments at Westhorpe House and the 55 dwellings at the Westhorpe Park Homes in terms of their outlook and the noise and disturbance associated with increased traffic movements, including delays and blockages impacting their ability to access their home. And the existing residential community is particularly vulnerable as their sole access is proposed also to serve the studios. The studios will envelop the residential sites on 3 sides, and the proposed workshops and offices will be in close proximity to those residential properties. And the previously open setting and outlook will be replaced by a dense grid of large-scale buildings in close proximity to those properties, and the impact would be experienced on the access route to the properties and from the existing paths and roads in the locality. With regard to noise and disturbance, the character of the access road to the homes will be transformed from a likely used rural access to a busy service road, resulting in queuing, congestion and delays in vehicle access and egress, causing inconvenience to local residents. Noise associated with the large number of vehicles in much closer proximity to the residential development and the traffic on the existing roads will be noticeable, and with the perceived impact more significant in the evenings and nighttime when background noise is lower. The proposed development will impact residential amenity to a significant degree, contrary to local plan policies CP9 and DM35 of the local plan and NPPF para 187E. The Council recognises that some mitigation is achieved through the design and benefits to be secured, and therefore attributes moderate rather than significant weight to that arm. Turning then to scheme benefits, as recorded in the planning statement of common ground, the Council accepts there are a number of benefits which weigh in favour of the grant of permission for the appeal proposal, including economic benefits, social benefits, and the biodiversity net gain offer. The fact that we do not rehearse those benefits in this short scene-setting opening statement should not be taken as indicating that they're not all recognised. There remains some dispute as to the weight to be accorded to some of those benefits, as well as in the case of the appellant's alternative staying offer, whether this is a benefit at all, but those areas will be explored in the planning evidence in due course. Overall, when the benefits of the scheme are properly weighted, they do not either individually or cumulatively outweigh the Greenbelt and other harms in this case, and taking into account the Greenbelt harm and the harm to the spatial strategy of the plan, character and appearance of the area, residential amenity, highway safety and sustainable transport, the proposed development conflicts with the development plan read as a whole, and there are no material considerations which outweigh that conflict. For these reasons and others which will be more fully set out in evidence, you will in due course be invited to recommend that the appeal is dismissed. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Mr. Bird. Okay. Ms. Nevin, are you ready to give your opening? Thank you.
This is an appeal by Dido Property Limited against a decision of Buckinghamshire Council to refuse full planning permission for a film studio development comprising 18 sound stages, workshops and office accommodation and a large backlot. The Council refused permission because, amongst other reasons, the development failed to demonstrate the very special circumstances necessary to justify inappropriate development in the Green Belt, would result in the loss of a significant area of the country park, cause numerous harms, including harm to the landscape character, a detrimental impact on the residential amenity of neighbouring occupiers, and severe highways and sustainability impacts. Little Marlow Parish Council and Save Marlowe's Green Belt, which come together as the Rule 6 party, support these reasons for refusal, and alongside the council will demonstrate that the case for refusal is even stronger today, given the spotlight that the exchange of evidence has put on the significant weaknesses in the appellant's case. Turning now to the appeal site. The appeal site is situated on Greenbelt land, as we've already heard, and it is crisscrossed by a public right-of-way and other permissive paths. Its intrinsic value to the local community as a green and open space is recognised by its allocation as a country park in the Wickham District Local Plan. The area's continuing allocation for outdoor recreational use as a country park is testament, ma'am, to the character of the area and how it is perceived and valued by the council and the local community. Councillor Crabtree's evidence describes the significant benefits that the local community derive from spending time in the appeal site, walking their dogs, exercising, bird watching, and enjoying some much needed open green space. The appeal site has been restored from its previous use as land mined for sand and gravel to an area of significant recreational and biodiversity value. Against this backdrop, the appellant's attempts to portray the appeal site as despoiled and denuded grey belt land could not be further from reality. And ma'am, you'll have the occasion to visit the site and see that for yourself. The appellant's claims that the recent residential developments at Westhorpe House demonstrate that the appeal site is capable of further built development are simply illogical. It does not follow that the use of a former country house for a small-scale housing development paves the way for a large film studio that would supposedly rival the best that Hollywood has to offer. Put simply, ma'am, permission to build one home does not then mean that it would be equally acceptable to build a large housing estate or a high-rise tower block on the same land, to illustrate the point. Turning then to the question of residential amenity. The appeal proposal would result in serious harm to residential amenity from loss of greenbelt land, harm to the character and appearance of the area, loss of access to the natural environment, loss of existing public rights of way, intrusive noise and light pollution, traffic impacts, parking overspill, increased risk of water pollution and flooding, and potential harm to local businesses. A long list indeed. On the Green Belt then, the Rule 6 party endorses the Council's case that these proposals represent inappropriate development in the Green Belt and should not be approved except in very special circumstances. The development proposal would remove a significant portion of the Green Belt, currently serving as a crucial green buffer between the neighbouring built-up areas of Marlow and Bourne End. And this would have a truly detrimental impact on the character and appearance of the area. But going on to that point then in a bit more detail. Even if, ma'am, the policy allocation for a country park has not yet been officially implemented, the site already fulfills the functions of a country park, dedicated to outdoor recreational use. If the appeal scheme is allowed, the character of this land will irreversibly change from a tranquil biodiverse space allocated for outdoor recreation to an urbanised expanse dominated by imposing buildings, noise and light pollution, and not to mention traffic congestion, highway safety impacts, and parking overspill. Now, it's important to stress that this harm to the character and appearance of the area has real human impacts. The closest neighbours to the proposed Marlow Film Studio site are the 56 homes at Westhorpe Park. The closest building, just to put this into perspective, to Westhorpe Park would be a mere 24 metres away from the homes situated on the north side, with only an approximately 3 metre high former estate garden wall separating the residents from the studio. The Westhorpe Park residents, many of whom are elderly and suffer from mobility issues, live in poorly insulated, prefabricated homes, rendering them especially vulnerable to noise and light pollution from the proposed film studio, and we'll come on to other vulnerabilities later on in terms of highways impacts. The appeal proposals would have an enormous impact on their quality of life. They will struggle to safely and easily access and leave their homes through the busy internal access road. Their ability to get to work or to important appointments will be at the mercy of how smoothly the significant volume of traffic generated by the film studio is moving along. And Julie Cook's evidence provides a clear account of the delays and difficulties experienced by residents who live in the vicinity of a major studio such as Pinewood. Now, given the serious and insurmountable deficiencies in the appellant's highways and sustainability case, the problems faced by residents near Pinewood will almost certainly be replicated at Marlow if permission is granted. Turning then to noise and light pollution. So once then the residents of Westhorpe Park have finally made it home through the traffic and busy internal access road, they will then have to contend with the imposing scale, noise and light pollution generated by the film studio. And just when they might have had some hope of rest, they will then be faced with the significant disruption of nighttime backlot filming between 7 in the evening and 7 in the morning on an area of land a mere 290 metres away from their homes. Julie Cook's account of living near to Pinewood Studios and the photos of the light pollution generated by Bray and Pinewood Studios in Councillor Crabtree's evidence provide an indication of what neighbouring residents of the appeal site will have to contend with if permission is granted for Marlow Film Studios. And the appellant's vague backlot management plan provides no assurance whatsoever to the residents of Westhorpe Park and Stalwardy, also known as Moat House, regarding the impacts of nighttime filming. And ma'am, these residents should not, we say, be treated as collateral damage of a film studio for which there is no demonstrable need, and therefore no tenable argument that the benefits of the appeal scheme would outweigh its harms. So then, loss of access to the natural environment and existing public rights of way. The appeal scheme would deprive residents of access to the natural environment and existing public rights of way. The Rule 6 party is concerned that the scheme would remove existing rights of way that have been in use for decades and are currently the subject of applications for formal recognition by the Council. And furthermore, the appellant's proposals to open up some of the area used for backlot filming to the public on an ad hoc permissive basis cannot compensate the loss of this currently open and natural environment. Any footpaths that would be preserved by the appellant's proposals will be surrounded by imposing buildings, generating significant noise and light pollution, reducing their amenity value. And the Rule 6 party does not consider that the nature and scale of this appeal scheme can be mitigated by green infrastructure and landscaping. So moving then, we've slightly touched on it, but moving then on in more detail to traffic impacts and parking overspill. The Rule 6 party will demonstrate that the appeal scheme would have a detrimental impact on traffic and result in significant parking overspill. The appellant's evidence does not present a realistic view of what is achievable in the local area regarding traffic flow and active travel. And crucially, the appellant's proposed 60-40 modal split is not achievable due to the nature of the local road and cycle path network, nor is it in the appellant's gift to remedy the lack of straightforward and easily accessible rail and bus connections. And once again, we see the example of Pinewood Studios serving as a cautionary tale. Despite being better connected than the appeal site to public transport networks, and notwithstanding the best effort, it must be said, of Pinewood's management to promote public transport and active travel, 88% of permanent employees who responded to a 2022 travel survey reported travelling to the studio in a single occupancy vehicle. And furthermore, the modal split aspirations put forward by the appellant in its application documents, I've given some references, are based on much lower estimated workforce figures than those submitted by Ellie Evans of Altera in her proof of evidence. Now, given that the appellant's highway safety case, sustainability evidence and plans for on-site parking are based on the older, lower figures, the appellant's transport case severely underestimates the consequences of its proposals on traffic and parking overspill, and we say this on its own justifies refusal. Turning then to water pollution and flooding. The appeal site, which is located in the Thames floodplain, is vulnerable to flooding and water pollution. There are well-documented problems in the local area with the capacity of the wastewater system. And indeed, as recently as March 2024, a representative of Thames Water reported to the Little Marlow Sewage Treatment Work Liaison Group that he was concerned about the additional pressures that would be exerted by a new film studio development on the sewage works. Now, the appellant has failed to engage with the Rule 6 parties case on this point. And we say therefore, ma'am, that you cannot be reassured on the evidence before you that the local wastewater system could handle the additional pressures exerted by Marlow Film Studios. And given the extent of the flood and water contamination risk at the appeal site and the concerns raised by a representative of Thames Water, this isn't an issue, we say, that can simply be kicked down the line by way of a condition. Then harm to local businesses. Customers of local businesses in Marlow generally travel by private vehicle and need or indeed want to park close by. The additional traffic and parking pressures that would be created by the appeal scheme would impact on local businesses by making them less accessible. Similarly, businesses such as the Queen's Head pub, which benefit from their proximity to walking routes, risk losing out on business if these footpaths are no longer pleasant to walk as a consequence of the film studio. And in addition to this, the distance of the film studio from Marlow and the intention to provide on-site catering at the studio would mean that local businesses would not be benefiting from the proximity of the film studios. This brings me on neatly then to benefits, and I'll deal with this briefly. But to mitigate these harms to residential amenity, the appellant suggests a number of so-called benefits. And these include the creation of a new community building and new footpaths, amongst other benefits we'll discuss further in evidence. And something, ma'am, that's already in existence cannot be put forward as an additional benefit of the appeal scheme. And the Rule 6 party will demonstrate that the other so-called benefits, such as the community building, are unwanted and unnecessary. Then need and economic benefits. The appellant's need and economic benefits case is nebulous, speculative, and full of wishful thinking. The Rule 6 parties case, on the other hand, will demonstrate that the UK already has more than enough film studios to meet current and projected demand for years to come. The economic case for Marlow Film Studios is simply not made out when one considers the many studios that are operating at far lower capacity than they can currently cater for. Some studios have closed, and even heavy hitters such as Pinewood are putting planned expansions and consent on hold due to lack of demand. Now, if the market was booming and crying out for premium facilities in the way the appellant describes again and again over numerous proofs of evidence, surely a studio of Pinewood's calibre would be capitalising on this rather than putting plans for its expansion on ice and letting others overtake them. Now, the slowdown in the market cannot be explained away as a temporary blip caused by recent Hollywood strikes. Instead, the current market is symptomatic of a fundamental change in the business environment for film and HGTV production. Indeed, much of the appellant's economic case for development relies on impressive-looking statistics, impressive when taken at face value, it must be said, from a market at the height of a streaming bubble, a market that no longer exists. It's also important to recognise that the UK operates in a competitive global market. The USA and many countries in Europe and Asia, for example, are increasing their fiscal incentives and studio offering to gain a more favourable position in the market. After all, Hollywood's loss is not just the UK's opportunity, and we need to keep this in mind and this broader context in mind. In addition, reviving the strikes and wildfire beleaguered Hollywood is at the forefront of President Trump's mind as he returns to office. On the 16th of January, he announced that he was appointing John Voight, Mel Gibson, and Sylvester Stallone to, and I quote, serve as special envoys to me for the purpose of bringing Hollywood, which has lost much business over the last 4 years to foreign countries, back bigger, better, and stronger than ever before. And the reference for that can be found at footnote 1, ma'am. So put simply, the global market for film and HGTV is much more complex, dynamic, and short-term than the appellant would have this inquiry believe. In this context, the appellant's projected market growth is not certain at all. And crucially, if the appellant's need case is not made out, it naturally follows that the appellant cannot secure the myriad economic benefits that it claims this development would bring, both locally and nationally. And what you are therefore left with, ma'am, is an inherently harmful scheme that lacks the benefits and very special circumstances to justify what is an otherwise inappropriate development in the Green Belt. So wrapping all of this up, this development would result in substantial harm to the Green Belt and many other harms to the character and appearance of the area, loss of access to the natural environment, loss of existing public rights of way, intrusive noise and light pollution, traffic impacts, parking overspill, increased risk of water pollution and flooding, and potential harm to local business. And when the Council and Rule 6 parties' cases are considered together, it is clear that the benefits of the appeal scheme do not clearly outweigh these harms, and therefore very special circumstances do not exist. The Rule 6 party agrees with the Council that the appeal scheme would conflict with the development plan as a whole, and that there are no material considerations justifying a departure from the development plan. So in due course, ma'am, the Rule 6 party will therefore be inviting you to recommend that this appeal be dismissed. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms Nevin. Okay, we're going to move on to interested parties now. We've heard the opening submissions from the main parties. Can I get Mr Seekins up first, please, from Buckinghamshire Bird Club? At the witness table, please. I'd come the other way, actually, because there's it's a bit of a squeeze, I'd say. Is it? Or is it not? No. And anybody that is wishing to speak today or at any point during the inquiry, if you've got anything written down that you're going to be reading from, if you could email that to the council, it will be very helpful to me so that I don't need to take verbatim notes. So if you are doing that, please can you email it directly to the council's planning case officer. Yeah, thank you.
My name is Richard Seekins. I'm the representative of the Bucks Bird Club that's been monitoring and managing this area for over 50 years. The proposed site has been very well surveyed for birds, finding 71 species of birds present in the breeding season, of which 53 were breeding. The ecology report suggests the survey should have been redone in 2022-2023. I don't see that that's been done. In winter, there were 62 species, of which 39 are of conservation importance, and 97 species registered over the last 10 years. But the submitted ecology report of this greenbelt land was glossed over in the planning application as an inconvenient truth. The subsequent valuation and complete lack of justification for overall species impact levels is deeply concerning. I personally have seen rare birds and birds of conservation concern here, barn owls, long-eared owls, which breed in the local area, firecrests, linnets, and in this area, the ecology survey found breeding willow warblers, a real rarity in Bucks. 186 species of birds have been recorded in the general area. 80% of breeding species found in Bucks breed here. There is no doubt this area of rich wildlife habitats supporting many priority and protected species and a designated biological notification site is extremely valuable. It is incredibly frustrating to hear the developers refer to this area as wasteland in an effort to downplay its ecological importance, just to convince people this is a suitable site to build yet another film studio. It is not. Once it's gone forever, even if the film studio fails like others in the area. The developers do not appear to have considered the Sang in their proposals. The Sang, an area set aside for rural recreational purposes within Little Marlow Lakes Country Park, is already allocated to another development, so there is not a biodiversity net gain. Converting the field to the north of Spade Oak gravel pits from arable into a grassland flower meadow given over to humans and dogs destroys the last hope of breeding lapwings and skylarks, whose numbers are crashing, and damages Spade Oak Lake in its current form. The mitigation is flawed. It is a biodiversity net loss, not a gain as suggested. That cannot be disputed. So I disagree with the council on that one. We urge the planning inspector to uphold the refusal decision, and we urge the Secretary of State to listen to the experts and people familiar with the area. Natural England, National Trust, Berkshire, Buckinghamshire and Oxfordshire Wildlife Trust, Bishop Barn Owl Group, the Chilterns Conservation Board, the Chilterns Society and Wild Marlow have all provided advice regarding the impact. The film studio proposed is quite simply in the wrong location. This is such a special area that any proposed mitigation must be corrected and must be seen through. We urge the Secretary of State to apply clear conditions to the implementation of and post-implementation monitoring of the mitigation and net gain measures throughout their operational life, as these sites must deliver what is being promised. Let it be known what you're destroying if this goes ahead.
Thank you very much. Could I just ask a couple of clarification questions?
Yeah.
You say the bird surveys are out of date. Why do you say that?
It's in their report, the ecology report from their site, that it should be redone in 22-23. I didn't see any evidence of that.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure the appellants will put that up. And then you said that an area of Sang was allocated for another development. What is
Yes.
that?
Someplace near Bisham, somewhere else, I don't know. Holland Park Development, I think it's called.
Thank you. Mr. White, Mr. Fraser, any questions? No? Okay, thank you very much. Could you possibly either give a
For a
copy
hard
or email a
copy or-
copy? Yeah.
You want a hard copy?
Not just
Email.
directly to me right now. If you could email it and then it can be distributed to everybody. Thank you. That will be ID4 when it comes in. Thank you. Thank you. Verity West, please. Take a breath. Take a breath and just look at me if you want. Don't look at everybody else.
I am speaking to you as a resident of Westhorpe Park for nearly 20 years. Having previously lived in Marlow since 1979, I have been involved in discussions with the developers from the beginning, written many objections, as well as speaking at the Strategic Sites Committee when the application was quite rightly refused on many valid grounds. However, I'm very sad that the impact on people's quality of life has not been given more consideration and weight during the nearly 4 years of discussions about this speculative project hanging over our heads like a swinging axe. This will have a huge detrimental impact on the residents of the 56 low-cost homes most affected by the proposal, many of whom are elderly and vulnerable, who have already suffered enormously due to the stress and uncertainty threatening our quality of life, and who have largely been ignored and dismissed, as we heard earlier, due to age and/or perceived lack of wealth by so many. Should the application decision be overturned for this massive and inappropriate industrial scale development on land that is protected from exactly this sort of proposal, the daily struggle to battle through the traffic jams caused by studio traffic, followed by a battle to get through the centre of the high security studio site just to gain free access to and from our own homes, will be intolerable, not only for residents, but also for the regular hospital transport, emergency ambulances, nurses, carers, hot meal deliveries, pharmacy deliveries, friends and family support, and all other deliveries, which are vital lifelines to many of the residents in the park. We cannot see how the studio will be able to monitor who uses the residents' car park when studio visitors cannot park on the proposed site due to lack of provision. Many residents have mobility issues, so not being able to park near their homes could be catastrophic. Traffic issues highlighted by the experts will have a very real detrimental impact on the health and well-being of the residents through delayed treatment, meal deliveries, health and social care, noise and air pollution, and constant stress. The A404 is one of the most congested roads in Buckinghamshire. And just this morning, the A4155 was chaos yet again because of a downed power line that came down overnight. It's a very regular occurrence for long delays on this road, from flooding outside the farm shop, car breakdowns, bumps at junctions and removal lorries when people are moving house, business deliveries, etc. That's existing before the addition of more studio traffic movements. There is also the issue of living in the centre of a massive building site for many years, with the daily traffic movements, noise and dirt impacting our lives. Our homes are not of standard construction and not as well insulated as many houses, so sound travels easily through our walls, and during the hot summer weather, having windows open is vital to prevent overheating. There will be simply no escape from the construction site. This stress will make people suffer physically and mentally. One of my neighbours who lives to the north of the park, closest to the proposed film studio and multi-storey car park planned, has asked me to extend an invitation to you to visit his home so you can see the real life impact. Please do let me know if this is something you'd like to consider, and I can pass on his details for when you do a site visit. Although he's here today as well, if that helps. The lack of consideration and compassion shown throughout nearly 4 years of the planning and consultation process has already taken its toll on our health, causing unnecessary stress and upset. Some people have tried to escape and sell their properties, but with no success, while the threat hangs over us all. If the application is approved, we will simply not be able to sell, so cannot move. None of us can afford to walk away from our homes to live somewhere else, especially not in our vital support network area. Effectively, we will be trapped living in the middle of a huge, noisy, 90-acre industrial site that after many years of construction will operate 24 hours a day with noisy and disruptive activities. Please be under no illusion that the detrimental impact on our health and well-being will be life-changing. This area is a peaceful, natural green space enjoyed by so many, including residents, using it for their daily social and physical activity when walking their dogs. The high security fencing and industrial noise will make these essential activities unbearable. The noise, light and vibration disruption will also severely impact the wonderful wildlife we enjoy daily. As an ecologist and founder of Wild Marlow, I am often working nights on site surveys and regularly see some of the nocturnal protected species on my way home. A badger trotting down the main access road. I've personally recorded 7 species of bats at the side of the lake, and I often see the barn owls. One even gave me a fabulous flyby when heading out on my birthday a couple of weeks ago, which was a very special present. And I'm looking forward to hearing the first skylark that nests every year in plot 1 of the proposed site, signalling that spring is on its way. These valuable creatures, along with so many others, will simply perish when their habitats are destroyed. The support shown to make a few wealthy individuals even wealthier at the expense of so many residents is incredibly sad. And for what? Yet another film studio that will likely stand empty like all the others in the area that have already been built. Some of my elderly neighbours have said they hope they die before it gets built if permission is given. Sadly, one lovely lady had her wish granted. The rest of us just wait for people unfamiliar with our community and the area to decide our fate. Please do not support such a project that will cause so much suffering for so many. We have absolutely nothing to gain, but everything to lose.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Thank you. And again, Miss West, if you could provide a copy of what you read out, if you could email it, that would be very helpful. Thank you. Okay, and she's gone, but any questions from you, Mr. White? Okay. I didn't think there would be, but I just wanted to check. Okay, Mr. McNeil, please. Morning.
Can everybody hear me? Madam Chair, good morning. My name is Joe McNeil and I live at Westhorpe Park. My statement today is very much a personal statement and I want to confine it to 3 reasons for my objection to the MFS application. And in doing so, I hope to make clear its adverse impact for Westhorpe residents. Point 1, at the risk of a degree of repetition, but it's for context, the Strategic Sites Committee report stated that this will be a very large, dense and imposing development in a sensitive landscape location. I didn't hear any argument this morning to the contrary on either side. It will significantly harm the national landscape and it will replace fully recovered greenbelt habitat with a heavily secured, imposing industrial campus of overbearing scale. This will dominate the surrounding setting and the neighbouring residences, and residents of which I am one. Best planning guidance states, where applicants struggle to finalise a design without an overbearing impact, it is often an indication that the proposal is unsuitable. Point 2, flood risk. I've seen the flooding, my neighbours have seen the flooding, Marlow has seen the flooding. It has come and it will come again. The local authority confirms the developer's case for permeable character is considered to be overstated and that the developer's own documentation indicates a built density of 37.23% for plots 1 to 3. Let me ask you all here present, and those that are not, is it acceptable and or rational to expose this recovered and thriving habitat and flood control asset to the risk of environmental harm and damage posed by this irrefutably dense development? Point 3, this is my last point. Human impact. The truth is that Westhorpe residents' peaceful enjoyment will be adversely and permanently compromised by this dominant and imposing development. The flawed site and local road layout and proposed security are much criticised and will subject Westhorpe residents and those that support their daily lives to running an ever-present gauntlet of construction, operational traffic, and commercial activity. The truth is, the adverse impacts that this development promises to Westhorpe and Marlow residents have been deliberately downplayed by an offshore developer whose public engagement misleadingly and shamefully reports that the land is despoiled and irreparably altered. When the truth is, the targeted land is greenbelt, is highly valued, is multi-beneficial, and is fully recovered, and is categorised by the local authority as mosaic pattern habitat, which is fully integrated within its overall rural setting. It is protected, as we now all know and understand and have for some time, under the 2019 Local Plan, Policy RUR4 and others. I remind you all very respectfully that the local plan was informed by public inquiry and was approved by Nicola Gully, a national inspector. A compelling number of bona fide locals, conservation planning and economic professionals are not persuaded by the developers' implausible VSC claims for social and sustainable economic advantage. I have a degree in design for a sustainable future. Truly sustainable design poses no harm to either human or nature. The inappropriate development will result in unjustifiable destruction and harm. And my neighbour Verity is quite right. We simply will not be able to escape. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. McNeil. Any questions, Mr. White?
No.
Thank you. Do you want to let me know if you do have questions rather than me asking you every time?
Generally, my house style is not to ask questions.
Fine. Some advocates are very different. So.
Yeah, I know.
Thank you. Okay, let me know if you
prefer
do.
my
want to
approach.
ask questions. Again, if you can email a copy of what you've just read out, that would be really helpful to me. Thank you. Julie Hall, please. Good morning.
Not now.
Yes, of course. Yeah, go ahead.
My name is Julie Hall. I'm a Little Marlow resident of 35 years standing and termed a close neighbour by Marlow Film Studios. I strongly object to the planning application submitted by Dido Property Guernsey Limited on several grounds. Only one of the four of the property developers behind this plan has ever worked at a film studio, let alone run one. Yet they promised to build and operate a first-class facility that would strengthen the British economy. I find it hard to believe. Dido dreamed up their scheme when there was a temporary shortage of film studios. Like many other property developers, they saw a get-rich-quick opportunity, but that was over 4 years ago and times have changed. The bubble has burst. Studios are now struggling. I understand that Blackstone have pulled out of Sunset Studios, Winnersh and Arborfield Film Studios are no more, and others like Wickham Film Studios are now being turned into data centres. The developers say they have raised the appropriate funds to build Marlow Film Studios, but have yet to provide the details. Tyler Perry, a world-renowned American actor, producer, filmmaker, and playwright with a net worth of $1.4 billion, has been one of the first to realize that the film industry is in a state of flux. In February 2024, after seeing OpenAI Sora, he put an $800 million studio expansion on hold, saying jobs are going to be lost. Over the past 4 years, Tyler has been planning the expansion of his studio in Atlanta, which would have added an additional 12 sound stages to the 330-acre property. All this is on hold after seeing the rapid developments in the realm of artificial intelligence, including OpenAI's text-to-video model Sora, premiered in February 2024, which stunned observers with its cinematic video outputs. Being told it can do all these things is one thing, but actually seeing the capabilities, it was mind-blowing, he told the journalist on The Hollywood Reporter. He noted that his productions might not have to travel to locations or build sets, thanks to the assistance of the new technology. He has expressed his concerns about AI's technology's impact on labour and feels that if some sort of regulations are not put in place, he just doesn't see how the industry can survive. This was also reported by the BBC, Forbes, and The Guardian. This would all be highly amusing if it wasn't such a terrible threat to the community and to the environment. The people of Westhorpe will have their lives turned upside down by the studio, and all that the developers have offered them in way of compensation is a laundrette, solar panels, and a couple of charging points. It beggars belief. But it is not just Westhorpe. The vast majority of Marlow are against the film studio, as a parish poll clearly showed last year, coming in at 85% against. Marlovians are very doubtful whether the studio is needed or whether it would bring jobs or economic benefits to the area. However, they are absolutely certain it would bring huge amounts of harm. On a personal note, several years ago, I retired from a busy, full-on office job to feelings of loss of purpose and isolation. On a suggestion from the medical profession, I started walking along the paths now threatened by the film studios, and soon began talking to Rosie, Oscar, Archie, Alfie, Jack, Polly, Roxy, Ruby, and Milo, who over the course of time have become firm, four-legged, tail-wagging friends, plus, of course, socializing with their owners. Dementia concerns us all and can strike at any age, but the older one gets, the more prevalent it becomes. The disease is 25% generic. However, it has been recommended that to stave off dementia, one should be both physically and socially active and have access to the natural environment and local green space. This was recognised in Natural England's report NECR 137, first published in November 2013, and that exposure to neighbourhood green space is a protective factor against dementia, lowering one's risk by 28%. Green space, a positive impact on mental health, also taken from a report by the Oxford Health NHS Foundation. To summarise, Marlow Film Studios represents no walks, no talks, no trees, no bees, no birds, no birdsong, no sun, and no life. For these reasons alone, I believe that the inspector should recommend that the development be refused.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Mr. Carter, please. Guy Carter, yeah. Thank you.
Can I say at first, we really appreciate the residents of Westhorpe Park, the opportunity to speak, because it's a real opportunity for us to get our case over. My name's Guy Carter. I've lived at Westhorpe Park for nearly 24 years. It's made up of 56 park homes located in what used to be the gardens for nearby Westhorpe House, which is a beautiful Grade 2 listed building. Now, I very affectionately call Westhorpe Park Care Home Light. Why? Because there are a high proportion of elderly residents who live happily in single-storey accessible homes, and they're supported by a really caring community around them. Some residents have had a fall, neighbours step in and walk their dogs and do their shopping. Maybe the government's social care strategy could learn lessons from Westhorpe Park. Some residents have a variety of health problems, including heart conditions and cancer. They're regular visits from carers, some up to 4 times a day, and they're both scheduled visits from ambulance for treatment, such as twice weekly dialysis, as well as unscheduled emergency visits. Now, imagine, if you will, if it was one or both of your elderly parents or grandparents living in a similar situation, and their care home was about to be annexed by a massive 24-hour-a-day industrial estate with nighttime pyrotechnics thrown in for good measure. Because to all intents and purposes, this is what this film studio development is. Now imagine that the care home is right next to the most delayed road in the whole of Buckinghamshire, because that's what the A404 is. You'd know that the thousands of additional daily traffic movements caused by this development could gridlock the nearby roads, and your parents' or grandparents' ambulance could be stuck in that queue. But it's actually worse than that, because these poorly soundproof park homes will be subjected to years of construction noise, the sound of pneumatic drills pervading every fabric of their homes. Please be under no illusion that this kind of stress is certainly life-shortening, certainly for the residents of Westhorpe Park. And this is in stark contrast to the current environment, where the residents of Westhorpe Park can enjoy walking in the quiet and peaceful network of paths near their homes and look at the beautiful flora and fauna. I've been running and walking in around what is now called Plot 4 nearly every day for the 24 years I've lived here. It's great for my physical and mental health, as it is for the residents of Westhorpe Park. Surely the government understand the massive benefits to the population of having easy access to beautiful green belts such as this. But Dido Property Limited Guernsey are proposing to put a road and a bridge through Plot 4. What do you think that'll do to the residents' quiet enjoyment of the area? Not to mention the effect on the incredible variety of birds, bats, insects and flora in the way of the bulldozers, the concrete and the tarmac. And as has been pointed out, I should emphasise that the mitigation from Dido Property Limited Guernsey has just been a cynical tick box exercise, which is quite frankly insulting to the residents. So what's all the damage for? It's a flawed development which will cannibalise the nearby film studios, which have either gone bust winners, changed their plans to be a data centre, High Wycombe, a half-empty Shinfield, or suspended their expansion plans, Waltham Cross and Pinewood, not to mention Pinewood closing their TV unit. Artificial intelligence is the order of the day, but all you need is some basic human intelligence, common sense, to know that this ill-conceived development is in the wrong place at the wrong time. Thank you. I can email that to you as well.
That would be very helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And then I've got Councillor Catherine Akers. Good morning.
I'm sorry it took me so long to get here, but it took me 2 hours to drive here from Bourne End this morning due to traffic delays, which I think was quite interesting. But thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today as chairman of Little Marlow Parish Council. I have 2 brief observations that I would like to make. Firstly, I know that proof of need for a film studio or not is a big part of the evidence that has been presented to this inquiry and which will be discussed in depth later. For now, I have an observation on the evidence submitted by Mrs. Ellie Evans under CD 8-007 on the predicted impact on the local economy that I think is important and particularly relevant to the Little Marlow parishioners that I represent. Of course, economic predictions are not an exact science, and the gap between best and worst case scenarios is huge. Mrs. Evans predicts that during the construction phase, estimated as 44 months, that's nearly 4 years, construction workers would spend on average 1.5 million per annum in the local area. This is equivalent to a total of 5.4 million in the local area over the duration of the construction period. Little Marlow boasts 2 pubs and a farm shop, and at a push, a boulangerie. I have talked with these local businesses, and they confirm that during the recent Star Wars Disney production on the proposed site, absolutely no revenue was generated by film crew. In fact, takings at Emmett's farm shop went down due to heavy traffic deterring regular users. As referred to previously, parking in Marlow is notoriously difficult, and the likelihood of film or construction crew picking up a sandwich in Marlow on their way to work is highly unlikely. Large construction sites generally provide subsidised food on site to maximise working time. BEC2 and PACT agreements insist that free food and drink is available on site for crew members, and this is provided for by specialist film caterers. Secondly, and finally, I would like to address a comment about the level of support Dido claimed to have for the film studios. I'm sure that the inspector is fully aware of this point, but I don't think that all Marlow Film Studio supporters are. If I was asked, do you think it would be a good thing to build state-of-the-art film studios on scrubland by the A404 that would make our film industry world-class and offer about 4,000 jobs and opportunities for training and employment for our children in films? I think I'd say yes. But that's not the question being addressed by this public inquiry. The question we are here to consider and to discuss is, are there very special circumstances, unique and exceptional conditions that can justify this development within the Greenbelt? And this application clearly does not justify very special circumstances. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your comments. That is absolutely perfect timing for lunch. So thank you, everybody. And thank you to all those interested parties that have spoken today. I appreciate it is difficult to come up here and speak in front of this amount of people. So thank you all for your contributions. It's much appreciated to me in terms of how I go about looking at the inquiry. So we'll stop for lunch now. It's just before 1 o'clock and we'll resume at 2 p.m. and the inquiry is adjourned until then. Thank you.